One of the problems with recruiting for investment banking is not the knowledge or skills you acquire, but the access to talk with real investment bankers to put your best foot forward. Our sponsor, WSO Academy, can provide those connections with 60 head mentors who are finance professionals at top firms like Goldman, Centerview, and JP Morgan. Imagine being able to get on the phone within 24 hours with one of the Academy's 1,300 mentors right before a critical interview. Get on the waitlist for WSO Academy today by clicking the link in the show notes or by visiting wallstreetoasis.com/academy. Hello and welcome to Investment Banking Insights. My name is Alex Mason and I am your host. This is the show dedicated to helping you learn both the technical and non-technical aspects of investment banking. And I'm so grateful that you're here listening to this, and we're just rolling through these discounted cash flow questions. So that's a topic that we're covering now, all the basic topics within the discounted cash flow analysis realm. And we're talking today about this concept of levered versus unlevered free cash flow. Levered versus unlevered. We talked about it a little bit in some prior episodes, but I want to bring a little bit more dimensionality to it right now with this question. And the question is this: if you use levered versus unlevered free cash flow in your discounted cash flow analysis, what is the effect? What happens? What changes if you decide to use this unlevered versus levered? And first of all, we have to really know what these things mean, right? Definitions always come first, and then once we understand definitions, we can put concepts together and make interpretations and use logical reasoning to get to an end result, right? So first of all, levered free cash flow. What does that mean? Levered free cash flow is the cash flow that accounts for all of a business's expenses, everything. So imagine a business has revenue, they have all sorts of expenses that are related to the business directly, and then they have some financing expenses, investing related expenses, and then you get to all the way down to this number. That's your free cash flow. This is what's known as your levered free cash flow, and it includes interest payments. Very important distinction. It includes interest payments. Now contrast this with unlevered free cash flow. Unlevered free cash flow does not account for interest payments. So it's a totally different thing. So how does that change your DCF? What is the effect? Well, the way that you can think about it is this. Because levered free cash flow accounts for all expenses, including interest payments, what is it helping you determine? Remember this in context now. When we're doing our discounted cash flow analysis, we're projecting out our cash flows over several years, right? And then we're using a discount rate to discount those cash flows back to the present, add them back up, and voila, you have your enterprise value. Or do you? Because with levered free cash flow, when you discount those cash flows back to the present and then add them up, you don't actually have enterprise value. You have equity value. Why do you have equity value? Well, it's because with the levered free cash flow, all of the debt investors have already been paid because that levered free cash flow accounts for the fact that all interest payments have been made. Well, if you've already paid all the interest to your creditors, to the debt investors, who is left? The equity investors. The equity investors get what's left. So equity investors get the levered cash flow. So in your discounted cash flow analysis, when you're discounting them back to the present, adding them up, you get the equity value of the company. Very important distinction. And this would make sense from the perspective of like a leveraged buyout, where you're really focused on kind of maximizing that equity value. Now, let's contrast this to understand the concepts one step further. Let's say we have a discounted cash flow model or analysis, and we're using unlevered free cash flow in our projections. Well, if we discount those unlevered free cash flows back to the present and we add them all up again, what we're doing is determining the enterprise value of the company, which is what I mentioned a few episodes ago when discussing the overall DCF methodology. So unlevered free cash flow helps you determine the enterprise value because it accounts for both debt and equity holders. Because remember, unlevered free cash flow does not account for interest payments. So when you're discounting it back to the present and you're adding those cash flows up, guess what? The debt investors have a claim on that cash flow and the equity investors have a claim on that cash flow. So that's why it's unlevered. And remember, we can never forget our enterprise value formula. Remember that from many episodes ago. Enterprise value equals debt plus equity value plus preferred stock plus non-controlling interest minus cash. And so we have those two components in the enterprise value formula, debt and equity. Those are the main components that we want to remember. And so unlevered free cash flow accounts for both debt and equity holders because interest payments have not been made. So an important distinction, a very important distinction. And this was really helpful for me personally when I was reading this and trying to understand it. Helps me put things together a little bit more succinctly in my mind when thinking about the DCF in context and why levered free cash flow is different than unlevered free cash flow. So that's what would happen in your model. Okay, that's what I got for you today here on Investment Banking Insights. Once again, as always, I am just so grateful that you're listening, learning all these things with me. Thank you for rating and reviewing the show. I appreciate it. Thank you for your messages and reaching out. I love to hear from listeners. So thank you so much for those of you who have already reached out. And I hope you're having an amazing, amazing day. All right, I'll see you next time.